Welcome. If you're listening to this, you're probably settling in for the night, looking for something calm to ease you into sleep. Tonight, we're going to travel together to a place and time that might seem harsh at first, the winter plains of North America centuries ago. But I promise you, this is a story about warmth, about shelter, about the quiet ingenuity of people who learn not to fight the cold, but to live within it. The Great Plains in winter were a frozen ocean. Grass is buried under snow, wind that never stopped, temperatures that could drop to 40 degrees below zero, and yet families lived there through the darkest months, inside hide tents, on ground that froze solid. They didn't just survive, they stayed warm, they told stories, they slept soundly. How did they do it? That's what we're here to explore tonight. Not through drama or conflict, but through the small, brilliant details. The way dried grass stuffed into a moccasin could save your toes. The way a second wall inside a tipi created a pocket of still air that held heat like a thermos. The way buffalo dung, baked dry by the sun, burned with a slow, steady warmth that smelled like sweetgrass. This isn't a story about conquering nature. It's about understanding it. About watching how a buffalo stands in the wind and learning from that. About building fires underground so the earth itself becomes your stove. About the nightly ritual of small tasks, changing grass, adjusting smoke flaps, banking coals, that kept the cold outside where it belonged. So get comfortable, pull your blanket close, let the wind outside be just a sound. We're going inside now into the warmth, and we're going to stay there for a while. The last grass, the Great Plains in late autumn, hold a particular quality of light. The sun moves lower across the sky, casting long shadows over the grass that has turned from green to gold to pale straw. The wind, ever present, carries a sharper edge now. There is work to be done before the snow comes, work that cannot wait. And across the camp, scattered along river valleys and sheltered coulees, people move with practiced purpose. The collection of materials begins weeks before the first freeze. Women and children walk out onto the open prairie, baskets in hand, gathering the dried discs of buffalo dung that dot the landscape. These chips, baked hard by summer sun and autumn wind, are fuel. On a treeless plain, wood exists only in narrow bands along waterways, cottonwoods and willows that grow where their roots can reach underground moisture. Hauling logs through deep snow can be difficult, and in some cases, it may be impossible. The buffalo chips represent months of stored energy, grass transformed by the animal's digestion, and then preserved by the dry air. Each chip is inspected as it is picked up. The best ones are fully dried, light in weight, and intact. Damp chips or those beginning to crumble are left behind. The collection continues day after day, with the piles growing near each teepee. A family will need hundreds of these discs to make it through a winter. They are stacked carefully, kept dry under hides or in elevated platforms where snow cannot reach them. At the same time, other materials are being prepared. Prairie grass, dried and golden, is cut in great bundles. This grass will serve multiple purposes in the months ahead. Some will be woven into mats, some will line the floors of winter lodges, some will be stuffed into moccasins each morning, replaced each night, a simple practice that will prevent frostbite when temperatures drop far below freezing. Willow saplings are cut from the riverbanks and stripped of their bark. The long, flexible stems will be woven into mats that provide a layer of insulation between cold ground and sleeping bodies. The work is methodical. Experienced hands move quickly, but there is no rush in the atmosphere, only steady attention to the task. Winter is coming, but winter always comes. This is simply what must be done. The tanning of hides continues through these weeks. Buffalo hides harvested earlier in the season are worked until they become soft and pliable. The process involves scraping away fat and membrane, then rubbing the hide with a paste made from the animal's own brain, which contains oils that break down the proteins in the skin. The hide is stretched, worked and stretched again. It must become supple enough to drape like fabric. A stiff hide allows wind to penetrate. A soft hide seals against the body, trapping warmth in the space between fur and skin. The brains of one buffalo are sufficient to tan its own hide. This is a balance built into the animal itself, a correspondence that was recognized and utilized. The paste is worked deep into the hide, which is then left to cure before being washed and dried. The result is leather that remains flexible even in extreme cold, that breathes while blocking wind, that can be worn directly against skin without chafing. As the days shorten, camps begin to shift position. Summer camps are often placed for access to hunting grounds and water sources. Winter camps require different considerations. Protection from wind becomes paramount. River valleys offer some shelter, but the best sites are where bluffs or ridges break the constant flow of air from the northwest. These locations have been used for generations. The ground shows evidence of past winters, fire-blackened stones, worn paths, sometimes the circular marks where teepees once stood. The teepees themselves are adjusted for the cold season. During summer, the covers may be rolled up at the base to allow the cooling breezes to flow through. Now, those same covers are pulled tight and staked firmly to the ground. The positioning of each lodge is deliberate. The door will face east away from the prevailing winds, toward the place where the sun will rise each morning. The back of the tipi, the steepest part of the cone, is angled into the west wind. This means the wind presses the cover against the poles rather than trying to lift it away. But the most important preparation happens inside the teepee, out of sight. This is where the true architecture of warmth is constructed, layer by careful layer, using principles that took generations to refine. The work is quiet, detailed, and essential. Without it, the cold will find its way in. With it, a small space inside a hide tent can remain habitable, even when the world outside drops to temperatures that freeze breath in the air and turn exposed skin numb in minutes. The last warm days of autumn are spent checking and rechecking these preparations. Smoke flaps at the top of each tipi are adjusted and tested. The long poles that control these flaps from outside are inspected for cracks or weakness. Food supplies are assessed. Pemmican, dense cakes of pounded meat and rendered fat, is packed into parfleches, rawhide containers that keep it dry and protected from scavengers, dried berries, roots stored in cache pits, and strips of jerked meat are inventoried. There is a quality to this work that feels different from the hunts and movements of summer. It is inward-turning, preparatory, aimed not at expansion but at consolidation. The vast openness of the plains will soon become hostile to anyone caught unprepared. But inside the circles of teepees, inside the carefully constructed layers of insulation and shelter, families will endure. They will eat, sleep, tell stories, and wait for spring. The work of autumn makes that waiting possible. The grass is gathered, the fuel is stacked, the hides are soft and ready, the smoke flaps are tested, the winter is coming, and the camps are ready to receive it. The moon of popping trees. The first deep cold arrives not gradually but suddenly. One morning the temperature has dropped and does not rise again. The Lakota called the moon that corresponds roughly to December and early January Wate Hi Yawi, the moon of popping trees. The name comes from a sound that breaks the winter silence, the sharp crack-crack of cottonwood trees splitting along the riverbanks. Cottonwood trees hold moisture in their trunks, and that flows through the wood, distributed in channels and pockets throughout the living tissue. When the temperature drops low enough, this moisture freezes. Water expands as it becomes ice. Inside the rigid structure of the tree, there is nowhere for this expansion to go. The wood fibres are stressed beyond their breaking point. The tree splits. The sound carries across the frozen landscape. In the profound silence of a winter night, when snow has dampened all ambient noise and no insects hum and no leaves rustle, the crack of a tree splitting sounds like a gunshot. It echoes off distant ridges and fades slowly. The sound is a marker, a warning, a reminder of just how cold the air has become. If wood can split, flesh is vulnerable. The plains themselves transform. The summer landscape is defined by grass, blue stem and buffalo grass, sometimes as high as a person's waist, rippling in wind like the surface of a green ocean. In winter, this grass is buried. Snow does not fall gently and pile up in soft drifts on the plains. It travels. The wind picks up the snow as it falls and drives it horizontally across the open ground. The snow is light, dry, and powdery. It scours the ridges clean and fills the low places to depths of several feet. This scouring effect creates a landscape of contrasts. The high ground, swept bare by wind, exposes the grass beneath. Buffalo can reach this grass by sweeping their massive heads side to side through the shallow snow. The low areas, coulees, ravines, creek beds, become impassable. Snow accumulates in layers, compressed by wind into a surface that is sometimes firm enough to walk on, sometimes deceptively weak. A person might step onto what appears to be solid ground and suddenly plunge through the crust into loose snow beneath, sinking to the waist or deeper. The wind itself becomes a constant presence. It does not gust and die away. It blows steadily, hour after hour, day after day, with a sound that varies depending on what it encounters. Over open ground, the wind produces a low, steady moan. Around the teepees, it hums and whistles, finding gaps in the hide covers and testing every seam. The wind is the primary force that winter brings. It carries the cold. It creates the wind chill that makes the air temperature feel far lower than the thermometer would indicate. At 0 degrees Fahrenheit with a wind of 20 miles per hour, the wind chill drops to 40 degrees below zero. Exposed skin freezes in minutes under these conditions. Breathing becomes uncomfortable as the cold air sears the inside of the nose and throat. Eyes water and the tears freeze on eyelashes. Fingers lose feeling inside mittens if those mittens are not well insulated. Toes go numb inside moccasins. But inside the winter camps, life continues. The tippies stand in clusters, their conical shapes presenting minimal resistance to the wind. Smoke rises from the peaks, pulled upward by the draft created by the fire below and the wind moving over the top of the structure. The smoke is thin and nearly invisible when the fire is burning buffalo chips rather than wood. It disperses quickly in the moving air. The soundscape of winter is distinct. The dominant sound is wind. Beneath that, there is the crunch of snow underfoot, a specific rhythmic sound that varies with the temperature and the density of the snow. Very cold snow crunches loudly. Warmer snow, closer to melting, makes a softer, wetter sound. The cracking of river ice adds punctuation to the constant wind. As temperatures fluctuate, the ice on rivers and ponds expands and contracts, producing sharp reports that can be heard from a distance. Inside the teepees, sounds are muffled. The hide walls and the inner liner absorb noise. Voices inside a lodge do not carry far, the sound does. The fire is gentle, the soft settling of coals, the occasional crack as a buffalo chip breaks apart. Conversations are quiet. Children learn early that winter is a time for lower voices, for sitting still, for conserving energy. The quality of light changes as well. On clear days, the sun shines on a landscape that is almost entirely white. The light reflects off the snow with an intensity that can strain the eyes. Snow blindness is a real danger for anyone travelling in this landscape for extended periods. The reflected ultraviolet light damages the cornea, causing pain, temporary vision loss, and a sensation like sand in the eyes. Travellers learn to squint, to use their hands as visors, or to blacken the area under their eyes with charcoal to reduce glare. On overcast days, the world becomes monochrome. The sky is white-grey, the ground is white, the horizon disappears. Depth perception becomes unreliable. A person standing 100 yards away might appear much closer or much farther than they actually are. This visual flattening makes travel dangerous. Without clear sight lines and recognisable landmarks, it is easy to become disoriented. The nights are long. At this latitude, in the depth of winter, the sun may be above the horizon for only 8 or 9 hours. Darkness comes early in the afternoon. The temperature drops rapidly once the sun sets. This is when families gather inside the teepees, when the fire is fed and tended, when robes are pulled close. The cold outside is not an abstract danger. It is immediate and lethal. A person caught outside without proper clothing and shelter will not survive a night on the winter plains. But the camps are prepared. The work of autumn has created the conditions for survival. The materials are in place. The knowledge is in place. The structure that will keep the cold at bay has been built. Now it is a matter of maintenance, of small daily actions repeated until spring returns. The moon of popping trees passes slowly. Each day is much like the one before. The sun rises in the east, moves low across the southern sky and sets in the west. The wind blows, the smoke rises, the fire burns, and inside the doubled walls of the winter teepees, warmth is held close, raising the winter walls. The tepee is often misunderstood as a simple structure, a tent of hide stretched over poles. In fact, it is a sophisticated piece of engineering, designed through generations of observation and refinement to solve specific problems presented by the plane's environment. The conical shape is not arbitrary. It is the solution to the problem of wind. A flat-sided structure catches wind like a sail. The force of the wind presses against the broad surface and tries to overturn or collapse the structure. A cone, by contrast, allows wind to flow around it. The wind presses the structure downward into the earth rather than lifting it. This principle is visible in the way snowdrifts form around the teepee. The snow does not pile up against the windward side. It curves around the structure and accumulates on the downwind side, where the wind slows and drops its load. The pitching of a winter teepee requires precision. The poles are assembled first. Typically, 3 or 4 main poles are tied together near their tops and raised to form the initial frame. Additional poles are then leaned into the crotch formed by the main poles, creating a circular base. The number of poles varies depending on the size of the teepee and the preferences of the family. A typical winter lodge might use 15 to 20 poles, each carefully selected for straightness and strength. The cover, made of buffalo hides sewn together, is then wrapped around this frame. The hides are lifted using a final pole, carried up the outside of the framework, and then unrolled around the structure. The 2 edges of the cover meet at the front, where they are pinned together with the wooden stakes. At the top, 2 flaps extend beyond the smoke hole. These are the ears of the teepee, controlled by long poles that remain outside the structure. By moving these poles, the occupants can adjust the flaps to block wind or create a low-pressure zone that draws smoke upward. But the key to a winter teepee is not the outer cover. It is the liner, the ozan or dew cloth. This is a second wall, constructed inside the teepee, that stands roughly 4 to 5 feet high. It does not reach the top of the structure. It circles the interior attached to the poles above and tucked under the bedding on the floor below. This liner is what transforms a single-walled tent into a habitable winter shelter. The principle is the same as a double-paned window or a thermos. The liner creates a dead-air space between the outer cover and the inner wall. Air is a poor conductor of heat. When air is trapped and held still, it acts as insulation. The cold air from outside strikes the outer hide cover. Heat from the fire and from the bodies of the occupants warms the air inside the liner. The air gap between the 2 layers resists the transfer of heat from inside to outside. But the system is more sophisticated than simple insulation. The liner is not sealed at the top. Cold air entering under the edge of the outer cover flows upward, through the gap between the cover and the liner. This creates a draft, a continuous flow of air moving up and out through the smoke hole. The fire at the centre of the teepee feeds this draft. Hot air and smoke rise naturally. The gap channels this rising air, pulling it straight up and out of the structure. The result is a living space that remains remarkably clear of smoke despite the presence of an open fire. The smoke does not fill the teepee. It does not linger at ground level where people sleep and breathe. It is drawn upward and expelled. The air inside the liner, below the level of the top edge of the cloth, remains warm and breathable. The occupants can tend the fire, cook food, and sleep without the irritation and danger of smoke inhalation. The physics of this system are elegant. The teepee breathes. Cold air enters at the base, flows upward through the insulating gap, and exits at the peak. The smoke from the fire follows this same path. The draft is powered by the temperature difference between inside and outside, by the natural buoyancy of hot air, and by the wind moving over the top of the structure, which creates a zone of lower pressure above the smoke hole. Adjusting the smoke flaps is a skill that requires attention and practice. The 2 flaps can be positioned to block wind from blowing directly down into the smoke hole, which would drive smoke back into the living space. They can also be angled to create a venturi effect, where the wind accelerates over the opening and increases the draft. The person tending the fire learns to read the wind, to anticipate shifts in direction, and to step outside periodically to reposition the flap poles. On calm days, the flaps can be opened wide. On windy days, they are adjusted frequently. During storms, when wind direction is erratic and gusts are strong, the flaps may need constant tending. This is part of the daily work of maintaining warmth. The teepee is not a passive shelter. It requires interaction, adjustment, and care. The liner itself is often decorated. Geometric patterns are painted on the inner surface. Triangles, diamonds, stripes in red, yellow, black. These designs are not merely decorative, they represent family lineage, spiritual protection, personal visions. Sitting inside the teepee, the occupants are surrounded by these patterns. The flickering firelight animates the designs, casting shifting shadows that move across the painted surface. The placement of the teepee on the landscape is also deliberate. The door always faces east. This orientation serves multiple purposes. The prevailing winds on the plains come from the west or northwest. Placing the door on the eastern side means the wind does not blow directly into the entrance. The steep back of the teepee, the side with the most surface area, is positioned to meet the wind. This causes the wind to press the cover more tightly against the poles. Facing east also means the morning sun strikes the door first. In winter, when every bit of warmth is valuable, this allows the sun's rays to enter the teepee and provide some passive heating in the morning hours. The sun's arc across the southern sky means that light will enter the eastern door early in the day, providing illumination and warmth at a time when the fire may have burned low during the night. Around the interior perimeter, just inside the liner, the floor is prepared. This is where the next layer of insulation is built, upward from the frozen ground. The floating floor. The ground is a massive heat sink. In winter, the earth freezes to a depth of several feet. Ice crystals form in the soil. The ground becomes hard, unyielding, and bitterly cold to the touch. Lying directly on this surface draws heat from the body faster than the body can produce it. Core temperature drops. Hypothermia sets in. A person can freeze while lying on frozen ground, even inside a shelter, even wrapped in blankets, if there is no insulation between body and earth. The solution is to build upward, to create a floor that is not in contact with the frozen ground. This is accomplished in layers, each one contributing to the overall insulation value. The first layer is prairie grass. Armfuls of dried grass are spread thickly across the interior of the teepee, within the circle defined by the base of the liner. The grass is packed densely, forming a mat several inches thick. This layer traps air, creating thousands of tiny pockets where air is held still. Over the grass, willow mats are laid. These mats are woven from willow saplings cut during the warmer months. The willows are stripped of bark and woven together in a tight weave. The mats are flexible but sturdy, and they provide a firm surface that distributes weight evenly across the grass layer beneath. The willow also adds another layer of air gaps, more insulation between the ground and the sleeping surface. On top of the willow mats, buffalo robes are placed. These are the winter hides, with the thick fur intact. The robes are heavy. A single large robe can weigh 30 pounds or more. They are laid fur side up, overlapping at the edges, forming a continuous surface. The weight of the robes compresses the layers beneath slightly, but the grass and the willow retain their loft, their ability to trap air. The fur of the robes adds yet another insulating layer, and the surface is soft, comfortable for sitting and sleeping. The result is a floor that does not feel like cold ground. It feels like a raised platform, a cushioned surface that gives slightly when weight is applied, but springs back. The layered construction creates what is effectively a floating floor, a surface separated from the frozen earth by several inches of insulating material. Heat from the fire warms the air inside the teepee. Some of that heat radiates downward, but instead of being lost immediately into the ground, it is held by the layers of the floor. The insulation slows the transfer of heat, allowing the floor itself to warm slightly, or at least to remain at a temperature closer to the air temperature rather than the ground temperature. The edges of the floor, where the liner is tucked under the bedding, create a seal. Cold air cannot easily flow under the liner and rise into the living space. The draft that ventilates the teepee flows through the gap between the outer cover and the liner, not under the liner. This means the warmest air, the air heated by the fire and by the bodies of the occupants, stays at ground level, where the people are sitting and sleeping. Outside the teepee, another layer of insulation is added. Snow is shovelled against the base of the structure, piled up around the perimeter to a height of a foot or more. This snow berm serves multiple functions. It blocks wind from flowing under the edge of the cover, sealing gaps where the hide meets the ground. It also adds thermal mass. Snow itself is an excellent insulator. The air trapped between the individual snowflakes acts as insulation, much like the air trapped in the prairie grass on the floor. In some cases, dirt or sod is added to the snow berm, creating a more permanent seal. The combination of snow and earth packs tightly against the base of the teepee, preventing drafts and adding to the overall insulation value. This practice is especially common when a teepee will remain in one location for an extended period. The effort of building the berm is repaid by the reduction in heat loss and the increased comfort inside the lodge. The concept of the floating floor is not unique to the teepee. It appears in various forms across cold climate cultures. The principle is the same. Separate the living surface from the frozen ground using materials that trap air. The specific materials vary depending on what is available, but the physics remain constant. Air is a poor conductor. Trapping air in place creates insulation. Inside the teepee, the arrangement of sleeping spaces follows a pattern. The space directly opposite the door at the back of the lodge is considered the place of honour. This is where elders sit, where important visitors are received. It is also the warmest spot. The door, even when closed with a hide flap, is the primary source of drafts. The back of the teepee is farthest from the door and closest to the fire. The sleeping robes are arranged in a circle around the fire, with each family member having a designated spot. During the day, the robes are rolled up and placed against the liner, serving as backrests for sitting. At night, they are unrolled and spread out. A person sleeping on these robes is separated from the frozen ground by several inches of prairie grass, a layer of woven willow, a buffalo robe beneath, a fur side up, and another buffalo robe above, fur side down against the body. The combination creates a cocoon of warmth. Body heat is trapped in the fur. The layers beneath prevent that heat from draining away into the earth. Children sleep near their parents. Infants are often kept in cradle boards, which can be leaned against the liner or suspended from a pole. The cradle board itself is lined with soft materials, moss, dried grass, or shredded bark that can be changed when soiled. The baby is wrapped snugly and kept close to the warmth of the fire and the body heat of the family. The fire at the centre of the teepee is carefully managed. It is not allowed to blaze high. A large hot fire consumes fuel quickly and creates more smoke. Instead, the fire is kept small and steady, a bed of glowing coals with a few chips smouldering on top. This produces consistent heat without excessive smoke. The heat radiates outward in all directions. The liner reflects some of this heat back toward the centre, preventing it from being lost through the outer cover. At night, before sleep, the fire is banked. Coals are covered with ash, which insulates them and slows combustion. A few chips are placed on top where they will smoulder slowly through the night. In the morning, the coals are still alive. A bit of kindling or dry grass is added, and the fire is coaxed back to life. This eliminates the need to start a fire from scratch each morning, which would consume time and energy. The floating floor makes it possible to sleep comfortably through the long, cold nights. Without it, the cold would seep up from below, overwhelming the warmth from the fire and from the body. With it, the teepee becomes a true shelter, a space where life can continue despite the extreme conditions outside. The grass will be replaced as needed. The willow mats will be shaken out and repositioned. The robes will be aired on sunny days when temperatures rise above freezing. The snow berm will be maintained, repaired after storms, built up again if wind erodes it. The floor is not a static structure. It is tended, adjusted and renewed. Like the fire, like the smoke flaps, it requires attention. But that attention is part of the rhythm of winter life, part of the daily work that keeps the cold at bay. The bison's gift. The American bison, often called buffalo, is an animal that evolved to survive ice ages. Its body carries adaptations that allowed it to endure conditions far harsher than those found on the 19th century plains. These adaptations, the thick hide, the layered coat, the massive bulk that retained heat, did not go unnoticed. The tribes of the plains observed the bison closely, not just as hunters tracking prey, but as students of survival. What worked for the bison could work for humans. The winter coat of a bison is a remarkable piece of biological engineering. It consists of two distinct layers. The underlayer is a dense, woolly fur, fine and soft, that grows close to the skin. This underlayer traps air in countless tiny pockets. The outer layer consists of longer guard hairs, coarse and thick, that shed water and block wind. Together, these two layers create an insulation system so effective that snow can accumulate on a bison's back without melting. The animal is losing so little heat through its hide that the snow remains frozen, undisturbed. This fact, the snow that does not melt, tells us something important. The bison's coat is not just thick, it is efficient. It holds heat close to the body while presenting a cold outer surface to the environment. This minimizes the temperature gradient between the animal and the surrounding air, reducing heat loss. The bison can stand motionless in a blizzard, facing into the wind, and maintain its core temperature without burning excessive calories. When a bison was killed, every part of the animal was used. The meat provided food, the bones provided tools, the sinew provided thread, the bladder and stomach. Lining provided watertight containers, and the hide provided shelter and clothing, but not all hides were equal. A summer hide, when the coat is thin and the weather is warm, is useful for many purposes, but provides little insulation. A winter hide, when the coat is at its thickest and most dense, is what was needed for cold weather survival. The timing of hunts was influenced by this. Winter hunting was difficult and dangerous, but winter hides were valuable. A hide taken in late autumn or early winter, when the coat was fully developed but before the harshest weather arrived, was ideal. The fur was thick, the hide was strong, and the tanning process could be completed before the deep cold set in. Tanning a hide is labour-intensive. The fresh hide must first be fleshed, all remaining meat, fat and membrane scraped away. This is done with a scraping tool, often made from a section of leg bone or a stone blade hafted to a wooden handle. The hide is stretched flat, either staked to the ground or lashed to a wooden frame, and scraped until the inner surface is clean. This scraping can take hours for a large hide. Once fleshed, the hide is ready for tanning. The tanning agent is the animal's own brain. Bison brains contain oils and emulsified fats that, when worked into the hide, break down the mucous membranes and proteins in the skin. The brain is mashed into a paste, sometimes mixed with water, and then rubbed into the hide. The hide is worked and massaged, ensuring the brain mixture penetrates deeply. This process must be thorough. Any area that does not receive the brain oil will remain stiff. After the brain has been worked in, the hide is left to cure. This can take a day or more, depending on temperature and humidity. Once cured, the hide is washed to remove excess brain matter, then stretched and worked while it dries. This working, pulling, flexing, rubbing prevents the hide from stiffening as it dries. The result is leather that is soft, pliable and breathable. A brain-tanned hide remains supple in cold weather. Commercial tanning methods using chemical agents can produce leather that becomes stiff when frozen. Brain-tanned leather does not. It drapes, it bends, it moves with the body. This quality is essential for winter clothing. A stiff robe or coat allows drafts to enter. A soft robe seals against the body, conforming to the contours of the wearer and trapping warm air in the space between fur and skin. For sleeping robes and heavy winter garments, the fur is left on. The hide is tanned with the hair intact. This requires care during the scraping process to avoid cutting into the roots of the hair. A poorly scraped hide will shed fur. A properly tanned hide holds the fur tightly, even after years of use. The way the robe is worn matters. For maximum warmth, the fur is worn on the inside against the body or against an inner layer of clothing. This seems counterintuitive. In modern clothing, fur is typically worn on the outside, but the tribes of the plains understood something about heat retention. The body produces heat. That heat is trapped in the layer of air between skin and fur. If the fur is on the outside, the warmth escapes into the environment. If the fur is on the inside, the warmth is held close. At night, sleeping under a buffalo robe with the fur against the body, a person is enveloped in warmth. The robe is heavy, which creates a sensation of being held, sheltered. The weight also helps the robe conform to the body, eliminating gaps where heat could escape. The fur traps body heat and reflects it back. Even in a tipi where the fire was burned low, where the temperature inside might be only slightly above freezing, a person under a buffalo robe remains warm. During the day, the robe can be worn as a coat. It is wrapped around the body, with one edge pulled over the shoulder and the opposite edge held at the waist. The robe can be belted in place or simply held with one hand. This leaves one arm free for work. In extreme cold, both arms can be drawn inside the robe, with only the head exposed. The robe becomes a portable shelter, a layer of insulation that moves with the person. The relationship between the tribes and the bison was not purely extractive. It was observational, even reverential. The bison showed humans how to survive. Stand into the wind, lower your head, Present the smallest profile to the storm. Use your bulk, your mass, to create shelter for those behind you. Conserve energy. Do not fight the winter. Endure it. These lessons, learned by watching the herds, informed human behavior and survival strategies. The bison's coat, harvested and tanned and worn, was not just a resource. It was a transfer of knowledge from animal to human. The warmth that had kept the bison alive through countless generations of harsh winters was now available to the people. The snow that sat unmelted on the bison's back became the principle that guided the construction of clothing. Trap air, block wind, hold heat close. These were not inventions, they were observations, applied. In spring, when the worst of the cold had passed, the heavy winter robes would be set aside. They were shaken out, aired and stored. Some would be used for trade, some would be kept for the next winter. The summer was for different work, hunting, gathering, moving across the land, but the knowledge embedded in those robes remained. It was passed down through demonstration and practice, mother to daughter, father to son, elder to child. The bison gave its coat, and the people learned how to wear it. Dressing in layers. The human body is a furnace that burns calories to maintain a core temperature of approximately 98 degrees Fahrenheit. In warm weather, the challenge is to dissipate excess heat. In cold weather, the challenge is to retain heat while allowing moisture, sweat, to escape. If sweat accumulates in clothing, it freezes. Frozen moisture destroys insulation and conducts heat away from the body. Hypothermia follows quickly. The solution, developed and refined over generations, is a layering system. Each layer serves a specific function. Together, they create a microclimate around the body that is warm, dry, and breathable. This system allows for adjustment depending on the activity level and temperature. Layers can be added or removed. Air gaps can be opened or closed. The body's warmth is managed, not just hoarded. The base layer, worn directly against the skin, is typically a buckskin tunic and leggings. Buckskin is deer hide, tanned soft using the same brain tanning process used for buffalo hides. Buckskin is thinner and more flexible than buffalo leather, making it comfortable for close-fitting garments. It is also windproof, the tightly woven fibres of the hide block air movement. But buckskin is also breathable. Moisture vapour can pass through the material, allowing sweat to evaporate away from the skin. The tunic is a simple design, essentially a large rectangle with a hole for the head and openings for the arms. The length reaches to mid-thigh or knee. The sides may be sewn or left open, depending on personal preference and climate. Leggings are separate pieces that cover the legs from ankle to hip, tied in place with a belt or thong. This design allows for easy adjustment and repair. If one piece becomes damaged, it can be replaced without discarding the entire outfit. Over the base layer, an insulation layer is added. This might be a vest made from smaller furs, rabbit, fox, or strips of buffalo hide with the fur on. The purpose of this layer is to trap air. The fur creates pockets of still air which act as insulation. The vest does not need to be thick. Even a thin layer of fur significantly improves heat retention. The vest is typically sleeveless, allowing freedom of movement for the arms while adding warmth to the core of the body. The outer layer is the buffalo robe, worn with the fur turned inward. This is the shell layer, the final barrier between the body and the environment. The robe blocks wind completely. It sheds light snow. It provides the bulk of the insulation. But because it is worn over the other layers, with the fur against the buckskin tunic, it also benefits from the warmth generated by the body and held by the inner layers. The robe becomes warm itself, creating a pocket of heat that extends from skin to outer surface. This three-layer system, base, insulation, shell, is the same principle used in modern cold weather clothing. The base layer wicks moisture. The insulation layer traps air. The shell layer blocks wind and precipitation. The tribes of the plains arrived at this solution not through theoretical understanding of thermodynamics, but through direct experience. What worked was kept. What failed was discarded. Over time, the system was refined until it became reliably effective. But the extremities, hands, feet, face, require special attention. These parts of the body are farthest from the core where blood flow can be restricted in cold conditions as the body prioritizes keeping the vital organs warm. Frostbite almost always begins in the fingers, toes, nose, or ears. Protecting these areas is critical. The feet are perhaps the most challenging. They are in constant contact with the frozen ground. They sweat even in cold weather because they are enclosed in moccasins, and they must remain functional for walking, often for long distances through deep snow. The solution is the winter moccasin, which is designed quite differently from the summer version. A summer moccasin is a thin, soft-soled shoe that provides protection from sharp objects and hot ground while allowing the foot to feel the terrain. It is meant to be lightweight and flexible. A winter moccasin is built for insulation. The sole is thicker, often made from tough buffalo hide from the neck or shoulder of the animal, which is the thickest part of the hide. The upper part of the moccasin is made from softer hide and extends higher up the ankle, sometimes to mid-calf. The key innovation is not in the moccasin itself, but in what goes inside it. The moccasin is made deliberately oversized. This creates a gap between the foot and the inside of the moccasin. Into this gap, dried grass is stuffed. The grass is crumbled and packed loosely around the foot, covering the toes, the arch, the heel. The grass serves two purposes. First, it insulates. The dried grass traps air, creating a barrier between the foot and the cold ground. Even though the moccasin sole is relatively thin, the layer of grass underneath the foot provides significant insulation. Second, the grass wicks moisture away from the foot. Feet sweat. In cold weather, this sweat needs to be absorbed and moved away from the skin. The grass does this. It pulls the moisture away from the foot, holding it in the dry plant fibers. But here is the crucial practice. The grass is replaced daily. At the end of the day, when returning to the teepee, the moccasins are removed and the grass is pulled out. This grass is damp, sometimes wet from the sweat of the day. It is thrown into the fire, where it burns quickly, releasing a faint smell of sweet grass or sage, depending on what was collected. Fresh dry grass is then stuffed into the moccasins for the next day. This daily cycle is essential. If the grass were left in the moccasin, it would freeze overnight. The next morning, the person would be putting their foot into a moccasin filled with frozen, damp grass, worse than no insulation at all. By replacing the grass each day, the system is reset. Each morning begins with dry, effective insulation. The practice is so simple that it is easy to overlook its importance. But this small routine, removing damp grass, burning it, inserting fresh grass, is one of the key practices that prevented frostbite. It was taught to children as soon as they were old enough to dress themselves. It was automatic, unquestioned, as natural as tending the fire or checking the smoke flaps. The hands are protected with mittens rather than gloves. Mittens keep the fingers together, allowing them to share warmth. Gloves separate the fingers, isolating each one and making them more vulnerable to cold. The mittens are made of buffalo hide with the fur on the inside. They are large enough to be easy to slip on and off, because there are many tasks that require bare hands, adjusting a bowstring, handling tools, working with rope or cordage. The mittens are attached to a long cord that runs up one sleeve, across the shoulders, behind the neck, and down the other sleeve. This design keeps the mittens from being lost. When a person needs to use their hands, they simply pull their hands out of the mittens, which drop and hang from the cord. When the work is done, the hands slide back into the mittens. This is the same design still used for children's mittens today, though few people realize its origins lie in survival necessity on the frozen plains. The face is exposed, which is unavoidable if one needs to see and breathe. But wind and cold can cause windburn, frostbite, and chapping of the lips. To protect the skin, a thin layer of grease is applied. Bear grease, buffalo tallow, or rendered fat from other animals is rubbed onto the cheeks, nose, forehead, and lips. This creates a barrier that reduces moisture loss and protects against the wind's abrasive effect. The grease also provides a small amount of insulation, though its primary function is protective rather than thermal. In extreme conditions, the collar of the buffalo robe can be pulled up to cover the lower face, leaving only the eyes exposed. Breathing through the robe's fur warms the air slightly before it enters the lungs, which reduces the shock of inhaling intensely cold air. This position, robe pulled up, head down, walking into the wind, is the posture of survival on the winter plains. The clothing is not just worn, it is maintained. Hides must be kept soft by working them regularly. If a hide gets wet and then dries stiff, it must be worked again, pulled, flexed, rubbed, until the suppleness returns. Seams are checked for wear. Tears are repaired immediately before they widen. Fur that begins to shed is a sign that the hide was not tanned properly or has been damaged. Such pieces are replaced. Clothing is also adjusted based on activity. When travelling or working, the body generates heat. Too much insulation can cause sweating, which is dangerous. Layers are opened slightly. The robe is loosened, the vest is unbuttoned or removed. When resting, when the body's heat production drops, the layers are closed again. This constant adjustment, opening when active, closing when sun still, is part of the skill of staying warm. At night, inside the teepee, some layers are removed for sleep. The buckskin tunic and leggings may be kept on, but the vest and outer robe are used as bedding. The body lies on one robe and is covered by another. This allows the skin to breathe while still maintaining warmth. Sleeping fully dressed can lead to sweating, which soaks the clothing and makes it less effective the next day. The dressing and undressing, the adjusting and maintaining, the daily replacement of grass in the moccasins, all of these actions are part of the rhythm of winter life. They are not occasional tasks, they are daily, sometimes hourly routines. The clothing is not a static barrier between body and cold, it is the dynamic system that requires attention, adjustment and care. But that care is rewarded with survival. The cold remains outside, the warmth remains within. Fire without wood. On the open plains, trees grow only in narrow corridors along rivers and streams. Cottonwoods, willows, and a few species of stunted pine cluster where their roots can reach underground water. Away from these riparian zones, the landscape is treeless. Grass dominates, stretching to the horizon in all directions. In summer, this lack of trees is merely a feature of the environment. In winter, it becomes a problem. Wood is the most common fuel for fire in cold climates, but wood is scarce on the plains. Hauling logs through deep snow, often over distances of several miles, consumes more calories than it provides warmth. The solution lies in another resource provided by the bison, dried dung. These discs of compacted grass and fibre baked hard by the sun and dry air are scattered across the prairie wherever bison herds have passed. The Lakota called them chips. Other tribes had their own names, but the function was universal. Buffalo chips burn. At first glance, this seems unpromising. Dung is waste associated with decay and unpleasant odours, but buffalo chips are not like fresh manure. They're essentially processed grass. The bison's digestive system breaks down the cellulose in the grass, extracting nutrients. What remains is fibre, largely composed of plant material compressed and dried. Once fully cured, a buffalo chip is hard, lightweight, and almost odourless. The collection of chips begins in the warmer months. Women and children walk out onto the prairie with baskets or parfleches, gathering chips that have been drying for weeks or months. The best chips are light brown, completely dry and intact. Chips that are still dark or damp inside are left to dry further. Chips that have begun to crumble are less useful, though they can still be burned in a pinch. The collection continues over weeks, with hundreds of chips accumulated and stacked near each tipi. The burning properties of buffalo chips are quite different from wood. Wood burns with a flame, crackling and popping, releasing heat quickly, but also requiring constant attention. Chips smoulder. They do not produce large flames. Instead, they glow with a steady, intense heat. A fire built from chips burns slowly and evenly, without the rapid consumption of fuel that characterises a wood fire. This slow burn is ideal for overnight heating. Before sleep, the fire is built up with chips. The chips are placed in a careful arrangement, not piled haphazardly. Air must reach the coals beneath, but the chips should not be spread so thin that they burn out quickly. The fire settles into a steady smoulder. In the morning, coals are still glowing under a layer of ash. A bit of grass or kindling stirs the coals back to life, and this fire continues. The smell of burning chips is another unexpected quality. Rather than the acrid, maybe forward, unpleasant odour one might expect from burning dung, the smoke has a mild herbal scent. Some describe it as similar to burning sweetgrass or sage. This is because the chips are composed of partially digested prairie grass, which includes many aromatic plants. The smoke is not harsh. It does not irritate the eyes or throat in the way that smoke from greenwood or pine can. Inside the teepee, with the smoke being drawn upward and out through the gap between the liner and the cover, the air remains clear and the scent is faint. not overpowering. The efficiency of chips as fuel is significant. A single family can stay warm through an entire winter with a supply of chips that occupies relatively little space and requires no processing beyond collection. Wood, by contrast, must be cut, split and dried. It must be hauled, often through difficult terrain. And in deep winter, when rivers are frozen and trees are buried in snowdrifts, accessing wood becomes nearly impossible. Chips already dry and already distributed across the landscape are readily available. There is also a practical advantage in terms of fire management. A wood fire requires constant feeding. Logs burn down to coals, which must be supplemented with more wood. The size and shape of logs make it difficult to control the burn rate. Chips, being uniform in size and composition, burn predictably. A tippy fire built from chips requires less tending, which means less interruption to sleep, less exposure to cold air when stepping outside to gather more fuel, and less overall effort. The use of buffalo chips as fuel is an example of the deep integration between the tribes and the bison. The animal provided not only food and shelter materials, but also the fuel to heat that shelter. The ecological relationship was comprehensive. The bison shaped the landscape by grazing, which encouraged certain plant species. Those plants in turn supported the bison. Humans inserted themselves into this cycle, utilizing the bison's resources while also managing the herds through selective hunting and the use of fire to encourage grass growth in specific areas. But there is also poetry in the image of a fire burning inside a teepee on a frozen winter night. The fire is fed by the grass the bison ate. The teepee is covered with the hide the bison wore. The robe the person sleeps under is the coat that kept the bison warm. There is a continuity here, a chain of transformation from grass to animal to human warmth. The bison, even in its absence, remains present. Its body has been disassembled and repurposed, but the function remains the same: survival in the cold. In the absence of buffalo chips, other materials could be used. Dried grass, bundled tightly, could be burned, though it burned too quickly to be practical for sustained heating. Willow bark and small branches from the river bottoms could supplement the chips. In some areas, dried sage or other shrubby plants were gathered and used. But none of these alternatives matched the efficiency and availability of chips. Where bison were present, chips were the primary fuel. When bison populations were depleted, whether by overhunting, disease or displacement, the availability of fuel became a serious problem. The fire at the centre of the teepee is more than a source of heat. It is the focus of social life. People gather around it. Food is cooked over it. Light is provided by it. Stories are told by it. The fire is tended constantly but gently. It is not allowed to blaze out of control, nor is it allowed to die completely. It is maintained at a level that provides warmth without consuming excessive fuel. This balance is learned through experience passed down from one generation to the next. The coals of the fire, glowing softly in the darkness, provide a low level of ambient light. Shadows flicker across the painted liner. Faces are illuminated from below, features softened by the warm glow. Outside, the wind howls and the snow drifts, but inside the fire holds the cold at bay. The smell of smouldering chips, the soft crackle of a coal breaking, the warmth radiating outward. All of these sensations combine to create a space that feels safe, sheltered, and separate from the harshness beyond the hide walls. The fire is the heart of the teepee. The buffalo chips are its fuel. Together, they transform a simple conical structure into a home, the architecture of smoke. Smoke is a byproduct of combustion. When organic material burns, it releases gases, particulates, and water vapour. In an enclosed space, smoke accumulates quickly, displacing oxygen and irritating the lungs and eyes. Without proper ventilation, a fire inside a shelter becomes uninhabitable within minutes. The challenge faced by anyone living in a cold climate is how to maintain a fire for warmth while preventing the smoke from filling the living space. The teepee solves this problem through a combination of structural design and active management. The solution is not passive, it requires understanding and attention. But when properly implemented, the system allows a fire to burn continuously inside the teepee while keeping the air at ground level, where people sit, sleep and breathe, remarkably clear. The key is the smoke hole at the top of the structure. Every teepee has an opening at the peak where the poles converge. This opening serves as the exit point for smoke, but a simple hole is not enough. wind blowing across the top of the tipi can create eddies that push smoke back down into the structure. Rain and snow can enter through the hole. The size of the opening affects the draft. Too large and heat escapes rapidly. Too small and smoke cannot exit efficiently. The solution is the smoke flaps, the two extensions of the hide cover that project beyond the peak of the tipi. These flaps, sometimes called ears, can be adjusted from outside the structure using long poles. Each flap is attached to a separate pole, which leans against the tipi or is held in place by stakes. By moving these poles, the occupants can change the position and angle of the flaps. The function of the smoke flaps is to create a low-pressure zone above the smoke hole while blocking direct wind from blowing downward into the tipi. When wind blows across the tipi, the flaps are positioned so that the wind is deflected over the opening, creating a venturi effect. The accelerated air moving over the gap reduces the air pressure above it, which pulls smoke upward and out. This is the same principle that allows airplane wings to generate lift. Faster moving air creates lower pressure. At the same time, the flaps block wind from blowing straight down the hole. Wind entering the tipi from above would disrupt the draft, pushing smoke downward and causing it to fill the living space. The flaps act as a baffle, redirecting the wind while maintaining the updraft. The adjustment of the flaps is constant. Wind shifts direction frequently, especially during storms. Each shift requires a corresponding adjustment to the flaps. The person tending the fire learns to read the smoke. If smoke begins to linger inside the teepee, it means the draft is insufficient or the flaps are misaligned. The solution is to step outside, briefly exposing oneself to the cold and move the flap poles. The adjustment might be subtle, a matter of inches, or it might require repositioning the flaps entirely. This skill is learned through practice. Experienced individuals can diagnose the problem by the smell and feel of the air inside the teepee and make the correct adjustment quickly. But the smoke flaps are only part of the system. The dew cloth, the inner liner, plays an equally important role. The liner creates a gap between the outer cover and the inner wall. Cold air enters under the edge of the outer cover, flows upward through this gap, and exits through the smoke hole. This creates a continuous draft, a river of air flowing up and out. The fire at the centre of the tipi feeds this draft. Hot air and smoke rise naturally, pulled upward by their own buoyancy and by the low-pressure zone created by the wind over the smoke hole. The liner channels this flow. Smoke rises from the fire and is immediately caught by the draft flowing upward through the gap. The smoke does not spread horizontally into the living space, it is pulled vertically up and out. The air inside the liner, below the top edge of the cloth, remains relatively clear. This is where people live, sitting on the floor, lying down to sleep. The smoke passes above this space separated by the liner. The physics of this system are elegant. The tipi is not a sealed container. It breathes. Air enters at the base, flows upward through the insulating gap and exits at the peak. The fire drives this circulation by heating the air, which rises. The wind over the top of the structure enhances the circulation by creating suction. The result is a self-regulating ventilation system that requires only occasional adjustment. On calm days of Nisasasam, when there is little wind, the draft is driven primarily by the temperature difference between inside and outside. Hot air rises because it is less dense than cold air. The fire heats the air inside the teepee, which expands and becomes buoyant. This heated air rises toward the smoke hole and exits. Cooler air is drawn in at the base to replace it. The circulation is slower on calm days, but it continues as long as the fire burns. On windy days, the draft is much stronger. The wind over the smoke hole creates a powerful suction that pulls air upward rapidly. The fire burns hotter because it receives more oxygen. The smoke is whisked away almost instantly, but the increased draft also means more heat is lost. The warm air inside the teepee is pulled out quickly, requiring more fuel to maintain a comfortable temperature. This is a trade-off. Better ventilation at the cost of increased fuel consumption. In extreme conditions, during a blizzard, when wind speed is high and direction is erratic, the smoke flaps require frequent adjustment. A person might need to step outside every hour or so to reposition the flaps. This is uncomfortable but necessary. The alternative is a smoke-filled teepee, which is worse. The work of adjusting the flaps is shared among the adults in the family. It becomes part of the routine, another task in the ongoing effort to maintain warmth and breathable air. The positioning of the fire itself also matters. The fire is built at the centre of the tipi, directly below the smoke hole. This alignment ensures that smoke rises straight up. If the fire is off-centre, smoke will drift sideways before rising, which increases the chance that it will linger inside the living space. The fire pit is often slightly excavated, a shallow depression dug into the floor which helps contain the coals and focuses the heat upward. Around the fire pit, stones may be placed. These stones absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night, providing thermal mass that helps regulate temperature. The stones also serve as a barrier, preventing coals from rolling out of the pit and igniting the floor materials. The placement of the stones is deliberate, creating a ring that defines the fire's boundary, while allowing air to reach the coals from below. The result of all these elements, the conical shape, the smoke hole, the adjustable flaps, the inner liner, the central fire, the draft, is a living space where a fire can burn continuously without filling the air with smoke. The air at sleeping level remains breathable. The smell of smoke is present but not overpowering. Eyes do not sting. Breathing is comfortable. The tipi is warm, well ventilated and habitable. This is not simple, it requires knowledge, attention and constant small adjustments. But the knowledge is embedded in the structure itself, learned and refined over generations. A person raised in a tipi learns the principles intuitively, not as abstract physics, but as practical skill. They know how to read the smoke, how to adjust the flaps, how to build the fire so it draws properly. This knowledge is survival, fat as fuel. The human body is a machine that converts calories into energy. Some of that energy is used for movement and work. Some is used to maintain core temperature. In cold weather, the proportion of energy devoted to staying warm increases dramatically. At rest, in a comfortable environment, the body burns approximately 1 calorie per minute. In extreme cold, even at rest, the metabolic rate can double or triple. The body is working constantly to prevent the core temperature from dropping below the critical threshold. This increased energy expenditure must be matched by the increased caloric intake. If it is not, the body will begin to consume its own stored energy. Fat first, then muscle. Weight loss in winter is dangerous. Fat stores provide insulation and reserve energy. Muscle provides strength for the work of survival. Both must be preserved. This means eating more and eating foods that are calorically dense. Carbohydrates provide 4 calories per gram. Protein also provides 4 calories per gram, but fat provides 9 calories per gram, more than double. In a cold environment where every ounce of weight matters when travelling and every bite of food must deliver maximum energy, fat is the most valuable macronutrient. The body craves it. The taste is satisfying in a way that lean meat is not. This is not cultural preference, it is biological necessity. Pemmican is the solution to the problem of energy density and portability. The name comes from the Cree word pimikan, which derives from pimi, meaning fat or grease. The food is simple in concept but precise in execution. Dried lean meat is pounded into a powder. Rendered fat, tallow, is mixed with the meat powder in roughly equal proportions. Dried berries, typically choke cherries or June berries, are added for flavour and to provide some vitamins. The mixture is packed into rawhide bags and sealed. The result is a food that is shelf-stable for years, requires no cooking and provides immense caloric density. A handful of pemmican, perhaps 3 or 4 ounces, contains over 500 calories, half of which come from fat. It can be eaten as is, due to slowly to extract the full richness. It can be mixed into boiling water to make a quick soup or stew. It can be fried. It can be spread on other foods. Its versatility and convenience made it the staple food for travellers, hunters, and anyone who needed portable calories. The process of making pemmican begins with the meat. Lean cuts of buffalo or other game are sliced thin and dried. Drying removes moisture, which reduces weight and prevents spoilage. The meat is hung on racks in the sun and wind or near a low fire until it is completely desiccated. Once dry, the meat is hard and brittle. It can be stored for months in this state. When pemmican is to be made, the dried meat is pounded. Traditionally, this is done with a stone maul on a flat rock or hide. The meat is crushed into a fine fibrous powder. The pounding is labour-intensive but necessary. The finer the powder, the better it will mix with the fat. A coarse grime produces pemmican that is difficult to chew and less pleasant to eat. The fat is rendered separately. Fat trimmed from the animal is heated slowly until it liquefies. The liquid fat is strained to remove any impurities or pieces of tissue. What remains is pure tallow, clear, slightly yellow with a mild smell. The tallow is allowed to cool slightly, but it must remain liquid when it's mixed with the meat powder. The meat powder and liquid tallow are combined in roughly equal amounts by weight. The exact ratio varies depending on preference and availability. Some pemmican is richer in fat, some leaner. The mixture is stirred until the tallow is evenly distributed. At this point, dried berries are added. The berries provide a slight tartness that balances the richness of the fat. They also add texture and make the pemmican more palatable over long periods of consumption. The mixture is then packed into parfleches, rawhide containers, or formed into cakes and wrapped in hide. As the tallow cools, it solidifies, binding the meat powder and berries into a dense, cohesive mass. Once solid, pemmican is hard, somewhat waxy to the touch, and incredibly durable. It does not spoil, it does not freeze. It can be carried in a pack, in a pocket, or in a pouch on a belt, ready to eat at any time. For winter survival, pemmican offers several advantages beyond its caloric density. It does not require fire to prepare. A traveller caught in a storm, unable to build a fire, can still eat pemmican and receive the calories needed to maintain body heat. This can be the difference between surviving and succumbing to hypothermia. The fat content is particularly important. Fat is not just calories, it is metabolic fuel that the body can convert into heat efficiently. When the body digests fat, it produces heat as a byproduct, a process called thermogenesis. Eating fatty food literally warms the body from the inside. This is why, in cold weather, the craving for rich, fatty foods is so strong. The body knows what it needs. The taste of pemmican is rich, almost overwhelming to a modern palate accustomed to low-fat diets. It coats the mouth. The flavour is savoury, slightly gamey, with the tang of the berries cutting through the fattiness. It is not delicate. It is satisfying in a deep physical way. Hunger is silenced immediately, energy returns. The cold feels less oppressive. Inside the winter teepee, pemmican might be eaten as a midday meal or as a supplement to other foods. A pot of soup made from fresh or dried meat might be enriched with a chunk of pemmican, which melts into the broth and adds richness. Children might be given small pieces to chew on while playing or doing chores. The elderly, whose metabolisms are slower and who feel the cold more acutely, might eat more pemmican than others. The portability of pemmican also made it valuable for hunting parties. A hunter on snowshoes, travelling miles from camp in search of game, could carry enough pemmican in a small pouch to sustain himself for days. There was no need to stop and build a fire to cook, no need to carry bulky supplies, just the pemmican, some water or snow to melt, and the tools of the hunt. This allowed for extended trips into the frozen landscape, increasing the chances of finding game when food supplies at camp ran low. Water is equally important, though less discussed. The body requires hydration even in cold weather. In fact, cold air is dry air, and breathing cold air increases moisture loss through respiration. Dehydration is a risk in winter, even though one might not feel thirsty. Snow cannot be eaten directly. It is frozen water, and eating it lowers the body's core temperature. The body must burn calories to melt the snow internally, which is inefficient and dangerous. Instead, snow is melted in containers near the fire, or over the fire. Inside the teepee, a pot might hang from a tripod above the coals, slowly melting snow into water. This water is drunk throughout the day and used for cooking. River ice, when accessible, is more efficient to melt than snow. Ice has a higher density of water molecules than fluffier snow. A pot of ice yields far more water than a pot of snow. Staying hydrated, staying fed, staying warm, these are the constant concerns. Pemmican addresses two of the three. It provides calories and it provides fat, which generates heat. Combined with the insulation of the teepee and the layers of clothing, pemmican is part of the system that keeps the body functioning in temperatures that would otherwise be lethal. The white silence. There are days when the storm comes and does not leave. The wind howls, the snow falls horizontally, and visibility drops to nothing. The world outside the teak vanishes. There is no horizon, no sense of distance. Everything beyond a few feet is white, featureless, disorienting. This is a whiteout. Travelling in such conditions is deadly. It is easy to become lost, to walk in circles, to exhaust oneself and freeze. The only rational response is to stay inside and wait. Inside the teepee, time slows. There is nowhere to go, nothing to do but wait for the storm to pass. The fire is tended, food is prepared and eaten. Small tasks are completed, repairing clothing, sharpening the tools, sorting supplies. But mostly people sit, they talk, they listen. This is when the stories are told. Winter is the season for storytelling. In many plains tribes, certain stories are told only when snow is on the ground. There are practical reasons for this. Summer is busy with hunting, gathering, moving. There is little time for sitting. Winter, with its enforced stillness, provides the time. But there are also spiritual reasons. Some stories involve spirits, animals that speak, events from the time before the present world. Telling these stories in summer might disturb the balance. The snakes and lizards are awake, moving through the grass. They might hear, they might take offence, but in winter they sleep, and the stories can be told safely. The stories serve multiple functions. They entertain, which is important when a family is confined to a small space for days on end. They educate, passing down cultural knowledge and moral teachings. They reinforce identity, reminding the listeners who they are and where they come from. And they mark time. A long winter night is broken into pieces by the stories. Hours pass without notice when a skilled storyteller is speaking. The trickster tales are popular. Among the Lakota, the trickster is Iktomi, the spider. Among the Ojibwe and other tribes, it is Nanabojo, sometimes called Wenabojo or other variations. The trickster is clever but flawed. He tries to outsmart others and often succeeds, but just as often his schemes backfire. The stories are funny, full of absurd situations and ironic twists. Children laugh, adults smile. Everyone knows the stories, but hearing them again is comforting. Creation stories are told as well. How the earth was made, how the animals came to be, how humans received the gifts of fire, tools, and knowledge. These stories are longer, more serious. They are told by elders, and the listeners sit quietly, absorbing the words. The stories explain the order of the world, the relationships between beings, the reasons why things are the way they are. Historical stories are also shared. Events from the tribe's past, battles, migrations, encounters with other tribes, acts of bravery or foolishness. These stories keep the collective memory alive. They provide context for the present. They offer lessons. A young person hearing about how their grandfather survived a winter even harsher than this one gains the confidence that they too can endure. The telling of stories is a skill. A good storyteller uses timing, voice modulation, and gesture. They build suspense. They know when to pause for effect. They watch the audience and adjust the pacing. The flickering firelight adds to the atmosphere. Shadows move across the painted liner. Faces are illuminated from below, giving them an otherworldly quality. Outside the wind howls, but inside the voice of the storyteller fills the space. Children sit close, sometimes wrapped in robes, sometimes leaning against their parents. They are learning not just the stories themselves, but how to tell them. They will repeat these stories to their own children one day. The oral tradition is how knowledge is preserved when there is no written language. Memory is the library. The storyteller is the book. As the night deepens, younger children fall asleep. They are bundled into their sleeping robes and laid near the fire. The adults continue talking, their voices lower now. They discuss practical matters, how much food remains, whether the storm will break soon, plans for hunting, once the weather clears. But there is no urgency, the tone is calm, everything that can be done has been done. Now it is simply a matter of waiting. The profound silence of the snow-covered plains makes its way into the tipi. Outside the wind continues, but the snow dampens sound. There is no birdsong, no insect hum, no rustle of leaves. The only sounds are the wind, the crackle of the fire, and the voices of the people. This silence is both oppressive and peaceful. It enforces stillness. It creates space for thought. The concept of time shifts in winter. Days are marked by sunrise and sunset, but the activities of each day are so similar that they blur together. One day of storm is like another. The passage of time is measured by the depletion of supplies, how much pemmican remains, How many buffalo chips are left in the stack outside? How often the grass in the moccasins has been changed? Time becomes tangible, measured in materials consumed. But there is also a quality of timelessness. The stories being told are old, passed down through generations. The practices being followed, tending the fire, adjusting the smoke flaps, replacing the moccasin grass, are equally old. The person sitting in the tipi today is doing what their great-grandparents did, using the same techniques, in the same landscape. There is continuity. The winter is harsh, but it is familiar. It has been survived before. The fire burns low, the coals glow softly. The people wrap themselves in their robes and settle down to sleep. Outside, the storm continues, but inside there is warmth, shelter, and the presence of family. The white silence surrounds them, but it does not penetrate. The tipi holds, the fire holds, the people endure. Reading the blank page, when the storm finally ends, the world outside is transformed. The snow has been redistributed by the wind, piled deep in some places, swept clean in others. The sky clears. The sun returns, casting brilliant light across the white landscape. To the untrained eye, the plains in winter appear featureless, a blank white expanse without landmarks or variation. But to those who know how to read it, the snow is full of information. The first and most important signs are the wind patterns frozen into the snow itself. The wind, blowing constantly from the northwest, carves the snow into ridges and troughs. These formations are called sastrugi, a term borrowed from Russian explorers, but describing a phenomenon known to anyone who travels in snow and wind. The ridges are hard-packed, aligned perpendicular to the prevailing wind. They run in parallel lines across the landscape, creating a textured surface. By observing the angle of the sastrugi, a traveller can determine direction even when the sun is obscured. The ridges always align the same way. If you walk perpendicular to the ridges, you are walking with or against the prevailing wind. If you walk parallel to the ridges, you're walking crosswise to the wind. This provides a navigational reference in conditions where the horizon has disappeared and all other landmarks are buried. The snow also reveals the contours of the land beneath. Drifts accumulate in low areas, coulees, creek beds, depressions. High ground is swept bare or covered only thinly. By watching where the snow is deep and where it is shallow, a traveller can infer the shape of the terrain. This helps avoid areas where travel would be difficult or dangerous. Deep drifts can trap a person, and falling through a weak snow crust can lead to injury. Animal signs are everywhere once you know how to see them. The most obvious are tracks. The tracks of deer, elk, buffalo, and smaller mammals crisscross the snow. Fresh tracks are sharp-edged, with clean depressions. Old tracks are softened by a wind and sublimation, blurred at the edges. By examining the sharpness of a track, a hunter can estimate how long ago the animal passed. But there are subtler signs as well. Steam rising from a thicket indicates that animals are sheltering there. In extreme cold, the breath and body heat of large mammals produce visible vapour. A hunter watching from a distance can shout this steam and know where to find game. Similarly, a patch of snow that is slightly melted or compressed indicates that an animal rested there recently. Grass that has been poured up from beneath the snow shows where a buffalo or elk has been feeding. Bird behaviour offers additional clues. Ptarmigan and grouse, which burrow into the snow to sleep, leave small holes in the surface. If there are no tracks leading away from the hole, the bird is still beneath the snow. A hunter can approach carefully and sometimes catch the bird by hand or with a simple snare. Flocks of birds circling and calling often indicate the presence of a predator or carrion. Following the birds can lead to a kill site where scavengeable meat might be found. The snow itself tells a story about recent weather. A thin crust of ice on top of the snow indicates that temperatures rose above freezing and then dropped again. Loose, dry snow indicates recent cold without thaw. Heavy, wet snow indicates temperatures near freezing. Wind-sculpted snow, with hard-packed ridges and soft pockets, indicates sustained wind. Each type of snow has different walking characteristics. Hard crust might support a person's weight, allowing travel without snowshoes. Loose powder requires snowshoes. Knowing what type of snow to expect based on recent weather helps plan travel. The position of the sun provides directional information. In winter, the sun's arc across the sky is lower and farther south than in summer. At midday, the sun is almost due south. Shadows point north. The angle of the sun changes predictably throughout the day. By observing the shadows and the sun's position, a traveller can maintain a sense of direction even in featureless terrain. At night, the stars provide navigation. The North Star, Polaris, is always in the same position in the northern sky. By locating Polaris, a traveller can determine north and orient themselves accordingly. The Big Dipper, easy to recognise, points toward Polaris. These constellations are constant, reliable. They do not change position relative to the Earth's axis. The landscape, though buried under snow, retains features that can be recognised by those familiar with the area. A lone tree on a distant ridge, the profile of a bluff, the bend of a river, even if the river itself is frozen and covered. These landmarks are memorised, passed down through stories and direct experience. A child travelling with their parents learns to recognise these features. They learn which direction the camp lies from each landmark. They build a mental map of the territory. Water sources are critical and also readable. Rivers and streams freeze, but not uniformly. Moving water freezes more slowly than still water. Areas where the ice is thin, or where water flows beneath the ice, can sometimes be detected by a slightly different texture or colour in the snow above. Springs, where groundwater rises to the surface, may remain partially open even in extreme cold. These open areas are magnets for wildlife and are valuable for obtaining water without the labour of melting snow. Vegetation, though largely buried, is not entirely absent. Sagebrush and other low shrubs poke through the snow in sheltered areas. The tops of taller grasses emerge from shallow drifts. These plants indicate areas where the snow is not too deep, which can guide travel routes. They also mark areas where animals might be feeding since the exposed vegetation is accessible. The quality of light changes throughout the day and affects how the landscape is read. In early morning and late afternoon, the sun is low, creating long shadows that highlight subtle variations in the snow surface. Midday light is harsh, flattening the landscape and making it harder to judge distances. Overcast light is diffuse, eliminating shadows entirely and making depth perception difficult. Experienced travellers adjust their reading of the landscape based on the light conditions. Wind itself is a constant presence and provides information. If the wind is blowing strongly, it is unwise to travel unless absolutely necessary. Wind increases the risk of frostbite, reduces visibility, and makes it difficult to hear or communicate. A lull in the wind might signal a short window for travel. Paying attention to wind patterns, when it picks up, when it dies down, helps in planning movement. The snow is not a blank page, it is a text, written in a language of wind, temperature, animal behaviour and light. Those who can read this text navigate safely, find food and survive. Those who cannot are at the mercy of a landscape that offers no forgiveness. The ability to read the snow is taught from childhood, not through formal instruction, but through observation and practice. A parent points out a track, explains what it means. A child learns to notice the angle of the sastrugi, the quality of the steam rising from a thicket. Over time, the reading becomes instinctive, automatic. The information is absorbed without conscious thought. This skill, reading the winter landscape, is as important as the teepee, the clothing or the fire. It is knowledge that extends the survival envelope beyond the immediate shelter. It allows movement, hunting, travel. Without it, a person is confined, dependent on stored supplies, unable to respond to changing conditions. With it, the winter plains become navigable, a place where life continues despite the cold. Walking on water. Travel in deep snow is nearly impossible without specialised footwear. A person walking through unconsolidated snow sinks with each step. If the snow is waist deep, every step requires lifting the leg up and out, then plunging it forward. The effort is exhausting. Progress is measured in yards per hour, not miles. Calories are burned faster than they can be replaced. A journey that might take an hour in summer could take all day in winter, assuming it could be completed at all. The solution is the snowshoe. Snowshoes distribute the wearer's weight over a larger surface area, allowing them to float on top of the snow rather than sinking through it. The principle is the same as that used by a boat. Spreading weight across a large area reduces pressure per unit area, allowing the object to rest on the surface rather than breaking through. The design of snowshoes varies depending on the snow conditions in the region where they are used. In areas with deep, soft powder, the snowshoes are large and rounded, maximising surface area. In areas with harder, more compacted snow, the snowshoes can be smaller and narrower. On the plains where wind packs the snow into a firm but sometimes brittle crust, the snowshoes are typically moderate in size, with a design that balances surface area with manoeuvrability. The frames are made from wood that is both strong and flexible. Ash is preferred, though willow or other hardwoods can be used. The wood is steamed or soaked until it becomes pliable, then bent into the desired shape. The ends are lashed together and allowed to dry, which sets the shape permanently. The resulting frame is lightweight but strong enough to support the full weight of a person, even when the person is standing on one foot. The lacing or webbing is made from rawhide. Long strips of hide are cut from larger pieces of rawhide and soaked until they become soft. The strips are woven across the frame in a specific pattern, creating a mesh. The weave must be tight enough to support the person's weight, but open enough to allow snow to fall through. If the weave is too tight, snow will accumulate on top of the snowshoe, adding weight to every step. If the weave is too open, the snowshoe will sink too deeply. The balance is crucial. The rawhide is woven while wet. As it dries, it shrinks and tightens, creating a taut, drum-like surface. The tension must be even across the entire surface. Any weak spots or uneven tension will cause the snowshoe to deform under weight. The weaving is skilled work, requiring experience and attention to detail. The snowshoes are attached to the feet with bindings. The binding passes over the toe and around the heel, holding the foot in place while allowing the heel to lift. This allows the wearer to walk with a natural gait. The toe remains anchored to the snowshoe, but the heel can rise and fall. The tail of the snowshoe drags behind, providing stability and preventing the snowshoe from twisting sideways. Walking on snowshoes requires a specific technique. The legs must be kept slightly farther apart than normal to prevent the snowshoes from overlapping. The gait is a sliding motion rather than a step. The toe is lifted slightly, the snowshoe is slid forward, then the weight is transferred onto it. The other foot is lifted and slid forward in turn. The motion is rhythmic, steady, almost meditative. The sound is distinctive, a soft swish as the snowshoe slides forward, followed by a crunch as the weight settles onto it. Swish crunch, swish crunch, swish crunch. The rhythm is important. Walking on snowshoes for long distances is tiring. The legs and hips work differently than in normal walking. Maintaining a steady rhythm conserves energy and reduces fatigue. Experienced snowshoers can travel all day at a pace that, while slower than walking on bare ground, is far faster than attempting to walk through deep snow without snowshoes. Snowshoes also allow access to areas that would otherwise be unreachable. Hunters on snowshoes can track game across the winter landscape. They can follow elk or deer into areas where the snow is deep, where the animals have sought shelter or food. Without snowshoes, these areas would be inaccessible. The hunter would be confined to the immediate vicinity of the camp, limited to whatever game happened to pass nearby. The ability to travel extends the range of resources available. Firewood from the river bottoms can be hauled back to camp. Water can be fetched from a distant spring. Traps can be checked. Neighbouring camps can be visited. The snowshoe transforms the winter plains from a prison into a navigable landscape. But snowshoes are not without limitations. They are awkward on steep terrain. Climbing a slope on snowshoes is difficult. The tail of the snowshoe digs into the snow and the frame catches on branches or rocks. Descending a slope is equally challenging. The snowshoes tend to slide and maintaining balance requires constant adjustment. For steep terrain, snowshoes are often removed and carried, or a different route is chosen. Snowshoes are also less effective on ice. The smooth surface of river ice or wind-polished crust provides no grip. The snowshoe simply slides. In such conditions, travellers remove the snowshoes and walk carefully, testing each step to ensure the ice is solid. Some groups use crampons, spikes attached to the bottom of the moccasin, to provide traction on ice, though this is less common on the plains than in mountainous regions. Dogs play an important role in winter travel. Dogs are lighter than humans and have large paws relative to their body weight, which gives them an advantage in snow. A dog can often run on top of a snow crust that would collapse under a human. Dogs can pull travois, a frame made of poles, over the snow, hauling firewood, meat or supplies. The travois slides more easily over snow than over bare ground, and a strong dog can pull a load of 50 pounds or more. Before the horse, dogs were the primary pack animal on the plains. Even after the introduction of horses, dogs remained valuable in winter. Horses are heavy, their hooves break through snow crust, and they sink deep with each step. In deep snow, a horse becomes a liability. It must be fed and forage is scarce. It must be protected from the cold. Dogs, by contrast, are hardy, require less food, and are more adapted to winter conditions. Rib-bone sleds are another innovation. The rib cage of a buffalo, when cleaned and turned upside down, forms a natural sled. The curved bones act as runners. A hide is stretched across the top, creating a platform for carrying small loads. Children use these sleds for play, sliding down the snow-covered slopes. Adults use them for hauling supplies over short distances. The sleds are lightweight, disposable, and require no special construction beyond what is already available from the butchering process. Travel in winter is not undertaken lightly. The effort required, the risk of becoming lost or caught in a storm, the expenditure of calories, all of these factors must be weighed against the necessity of the trip. But when travel is necessary, the snowshoe makes it possible. The landscape, though hostile, is not impassable. The white expanse can be crossed slowly and carefully by those who have the tools and the knowledge to do so. The time of telling. Winter is not just a season of survival, it is the season of transmission. The enforced stillness, the confinement to the teepee, the long nights, all of these create space for the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. Summer is for doing, winter is for learning. The education of children on the plains is not formal in the sense of structured lessons or classrooms. It is embedded in daily life. A child learns by watching, listening, and practicing. They observe their parents and grandparents, absorbing techniques and behaviours. They ask questions and receive answers. They attempt tasks and are gently corrected. The process is continuous, woven into the fabric of everyday existence. But winter provides a concentrated opportunity for this transmission. With the family gathered inside the teepee, with hours of darkness and nothing to do but talk, the elders teach. They tell stories, yes, but they also explain. How to read the snow, how to tan a hide, how to recognise the symptoms of frostbite and how to treat it, how to predict weather based on the colour of the sky or the behaviour of animals. This knowledge is not written down. It is spoken, demonstrated and remembered. The method of teaching is patient and repetitive. A story might be told many times over the course of a winter. Each telling reinforces the information. Children hear the same details again and again until they are memorised. The repetition is not boring, it's comforting. The familiar stories provide a sense of continuity and security. The child knows what is coming next. They anticipate the turning points, the clever solution, the moral lesson. This predictability is part of the learning process. Certain stories carry specific teachings. A tale about a hunter who ignored the signs of an approaching storm and became lost teaches the importance of observation and caution. A story about a person who shared their food during a time of scarcity and was later helped in return teaches the value of generosity and reciprocity. The moral is not always stated explicitly. The listener is expected to infer the lesson from the events of the story. Practical skills are taught through demonstration and practice. A grandmother might show a young girl how to weave a willow mat, guiding her hands through the motions. A grandfather might teach a boy how to fletch an arrow, explaining the importance of alignment and balance. These skills are not abstract, they are immediately useful. The mat will be used, the arrow will be shot. The child sees the purpose and understands the importance of learning correctly. Some knowledge is restricted. Not all stories are told to children. Some are reserved for those who have reached a certain age or achieved a certain status. Some knowledge is considered sacred and is shared only with those who have been initiated into specific societies or roles. This creates a hierarchy of knowledge which reinforces social structure and provides incentives for young people to seek further learning. The winter count, or wanietu wawapi, is one of the most important teaching tools. The winter count is a pictographic rehearsal of the tribe's history, with each winter represented by a single image. The image is chosen by the keeper of the count, often in consultation with other elders, to represent the most significant event of that year. The images are painted on a buffalo hide in a spiral pattern, moving outward from the centre. Each image is a mnemonic device. It might depict a meteor shower, a particularly harsh winter, a battle, the arrival of traders, an epidemic, or the birth of a notable person. The image itself does not tell the full story, it is a trigger for memory. The keeper of the count knows the story associated with each image and recounts it when asked. Young people learn these stories and in doing so learn the history of their tribe. The winter count serves multiple purposes. It is a historical record preserving the collective memory of the tribe. It is a teaching tool used to educate younger generations about significant events. And it is a calendar, marking the passage of time. Instead of numbering years sequentially, time is measured in winters. An event might be described as happening 3 winters ago, or the winter of the Great Snow. The winter count provides a framework for placing events in chronological order. Looking at the winter count, a person can see the continuity of their people. They can see that their current winter is not unique. There have been harsh winters before, there have been times of scarcity, times of conflict, times of change, and the tribe has survived. This knowledge is reassuring. It places the present struggle in context. It suggests that, as in the past, survival is possible. The taboo against telling certain stories in summer is not arbitrary. It reflects a worldview in which the human world and the natural world are interconnected. Animals, plants, and natural forces are seen as having agency, as being capable of hearing and responding. Telling certain stories when the snakes are awake might invite their attention or displeasure. The restriction ensures that these stories are told when it is safe, when the spirits and creatures they involve are dormant. This worldview also emphasizes respect. The natural world is not viewed as a resource to be exploited, but as a community of beings with whom humans share the land. The bison, the grass, the wind, the cold, all are part of a larger system. Humans must live within this system, not dominate it. The knowledge passed down through stories reinforces this ethic. It teaches humility, caution, and respect. The winter is also a time for spiritual instruction. Vision quests, ceremonies, and teachings about the sacred are often initiated or completed during this season. The isolation and stillness of winter create conditions conducive to reflection and spiritual experience. Young people seeking guidance or initiation might spend time alone, fasting and praying, waiting for a vision or insight. These experiences are deeply personal, but they are also communal. They are discussed, interpreted, and integrated into the person's role within the tribe. Language itself is preserved and refined during the winter. The stories are told in the tribe's language, using specific phrases and vocabulary that might not be used in everyday conversation. Archaic forms of words, ceremonial language, metaphors, and poetic structures are maintained through repeated use. Children hearing these stories absorb the full richness of their language, including forms that are rarely used otherwise. This ensures that the language does not degrade or simplify over time. The teepee, in winter, becomes a classroom. The fire provides light and warmth. The family gathers close, the elder speaks, and the children listen. The knowledge flows from old to young, from experienced to inexperienced. This is how culture is preserved. This is how survival techniques are passed down. Without this transmission, each generation would have to learn from scratch, making the same mistakes, discovering the same solutions. With it, the accumulated wisdom of centuries is available to every child. The work of winter is not just physical, it is intellectual, cultural, and spiritual. The body must be kept warm, yes, but the mind must also be engaged, the memory must be filled, the identity must be reinforced. The winter, for all its harshness, provides the time and space for this work. The cold outside forces people together. The darkness invites storytelling. The stillness allows for deep listening. And in this way, the knowledge survives. The underground fire. There are times when a fire cannot be built in the open, when stealth is required, when wind is too strong, when a traveller is far from camp and must conserve effort. In these situations, the Dakota fire hole offers a solution. It is a method of building a fire below ground level, where the earth itself provides insulation and the wind cannot steal the heat. The construction is simple but requires some effort. 2 holes are dug into the ground. The first hole is the fire chamber, approximately 1 foot in diameter and 1 foot deep. The second hole is an air tunnel, smaller in diameter, dug at an angle from the surface to the bottom of the fire chamber. The distance between the two holes is typically 2 to 3 feet. The air tunnel slopes gently downward, connecting to the fire chamber at the base. The principle is straightforward. Fire requires oxygen. In a normal above-ground fire, wind provides oxygen but also disrupts the combustion and carries away heat. In the Dakota fire hole, the air tunnel provides a steady, controlled supply of oxygen. Air is drawn down through the tunnel, feeding the fire at the base of the chamber. The draft is strong because the fire creates a low-pressure zone above it, pulling air through the tunnel. The fire is built at the bottom of the chamber. Kindling is placed first, followed by the larger pieces of fuel. The fuel can be wood, buffalo chips, dried grass, or any combustible material. The fire is lit, and as it begins to burn, the draft through the tunnel strengthens. The fire burns hot and efficiently because it receives a continuous supply of oxygen from below rather than being exposed to erratic wind from above. The advantages of this design are multiple. First, the fire is sheltered from wind. Wind cannot blow directly into the fire chamber, so the flames do not gust and flicker. The fire burns steadily, with less smoke and more complete combustion. This makes the fire more efficient, extracting more heat from the same amount of fuel. Second, the earth itself acts as insulation. The walls of the fire chamber absorb heat and radiate it back into the chamber. This retained heat keeps the fire burning even when less fuel is added. The ground around the chamber becomes warm, and this warmth radiates upward. A person sitting near the fire hole feels the heat rising from the earth, not just from the visible flames. Third, the fire is less visible. Because the flames are below ground level, they do not produce a bright glow that can be seen from a distance. This is important for hunters who do not want to alert game to their presence, or for travellers who wish to avoid detection. The light from the fire is contained within the chamber and does not spread far. Fourth, the smoke produced is minimal and disperses quickly. The efficient combustion and strong draft mean that most of the fuel is burned completely, leaving little smoke. What smoke is produced rises from the chamber and dissipates rapidly in the open air. From a distance, the fire hole is nearly invisible. There is no plume of smoke to mark its location. A flat stone can be placed over the fire chamber, converting it into a stove. The stone heats up from the fire below and food can be cooked on its surface. This provides a convenient cooking surface without the need for a grill or tripod. Alternatively, a pot can be suspended over the chamber, hanging from a stick or frame, and water can be boiled or food can be cooked in the pot. The Dakota fire hole is particularly useful when travelling on foot or on snowshoes. A traveller can dig the holes in a short amount of time using a knife and a sharpened stick or even bare hands if the ground is not frozen solid. Once the fire is lit, it requires little tending. The traveller can warm themselves, cook a meal and melt snow for water, all with minimal effort and fuel. When finished, the fire can be extinguished by covering the chamber with dirt, leaving little trace of its presence. In winter, when the ground is frozen, digging the fire hole is more difficult. The top layer of soil might be frozen solid to a depth of several inches or more. However, in areas where snow is deep, the snow itself provides insulation, and the ground beneath it may be less frozen. Digging through the snow to reach the soil, then excavating the holes, is still possible. Alternatively, the fire hole can be dug in a location where the ground is naturally softer, along a riverbank, in a forested area where leaf litter has insulated the soil, or near a rocky outcrop where the ground is more protected. The fire hole is also useful in groups. Multiple fire holes can be dug in close proximity, providing heat for several people without the need for a large, conspicuous fire. Each person can tend their own fire, adjusting the fuel and draft to their preference. The communal warmth is distributed rather than centralized, which can be more comfortable in some situations. The technique is not unique to the Plains tribes. Similar methods have been used by the various cultures around the world wherever the need for a low-profile, efficient fire exists. The specific term Dakota fire hole comes from the Dakota people, but the principle is universal. It is a solution to a common problem: how to create fire in a way that is efficient, controlled and discreet. For a hunter tracking game across the winter plains, the fire hole is invaluable. The hunter might be miles from camp following tracks through deep snow. When night falls or when fatigue sets in, the hunter needs warmth and food. Digging a fire hole allows the hunter to create a fire quickly, cook a meal of pemmican or dried meat, warm themselves and then continue. The fire can be extinguished and the site abandoned without leaving a significant mark. The earth, in this method, becomes part of the survival toolkit. It is not just a surface to walk on or a place to dig shelter. It is insulation, it is a chimney, it is a stove. The ground itself, properly utilised, contributes to the efficiency of the fire. This is another example of working with the environment rather than against it, using the properties of the landscape to solve problems. The fire hole is a small technique, easily overlooked, but like the grass in the moccasin, like the adjustment of the smoke flaps, it is part of the larger system of knowledge that made winter survival possible. Each technique, each small practice contributes to the whole. Together, they create a comprehensive strategy for enduring the cold. The first thaw. The quality of light begins to change before the temperature does. Subtle at first, barely noticeable, but consistent. The sun's arc across the sky shifts slightly higher. The angle of the light softens. The long blue shadows of midwinter begin to shorten. These are the first signs that the season is turning. The ice on the rivers, which has been silent and solid for months, begins to speak. Sharp reports echo across the landscape, loud cracks that sound like gunfire. The ice is expanding and contracting as temperatures fluctuate. During the day, when the sun warms the surface, the ice expands. At night, when the temperature drops again, it contracts. This cycle creates stress in the ice, and the stress is released suddenly with a crack. The sound carries for miles, a reminder that the frozen world is not as static as it appears. The snow itself changes character. The dry, powdery snow of deep winter begins to develop a crust. During the day, the surface layer melts slightly. At night, it refreezes, forming a hard, icy shell. Walking on this crust is treacherous. Sometimes it supports weight. Sometimes it collapses suddenly, dropping the walker through into the softer snow beneath. Snowshoeing becomes more difficult. The crust does not allow snow to fall through the webbing, so each step accumulates weight. But the changing snow also signals that the end is near. The melting, even though it freezes again at night, means that warmth is returning. The cycle of melt and freeze is a transition. Eventually, the melting will outpace the freezing. The snow will turn to slush, then to water. The ground will thaw. The grass will return. The grass inside the moccasin stays drier now. The feet sweat less in the slightly warmer air. The nightly ritual of changing the grass continues, but the grass removed each evening is less damp than it was in the deepest cold. This is a small but tangible sign of improvement. The body is working less hard to stay warm. The burden is lightening. Animal activity increases. The herds, which have been conserving energy through the winter, begin to move more. Tracks become more numerous. Birds return, migrating north from warmer regions. The first flocks are seen on the horizon, their calls carrying across the still frozen landscape. The birds are a sign that spring is coming, that the cycle is continuing, that survival is assured. Inside the teepees, the mood shifts. The long confinement of winter begins to ease. People venture outside more often, not just to tend the fire or adjust the smoke flaps, but to walk, to look at the sky, to breathe the air. The air is still cold, but it no longer has the sharp, biting quality of midwinter. It is gentler, more bearable. Plans are made for the season ahead. Where will the camp move when the snow melts? Where are the bison likely to be in the spring? What repairs need to be made to the teepees, the tools, the weapons? These discussions occupy the long evenings. There is a sense of anticipation now, a forward-looking quality that was absent during the deepest cold when the focus was entirely on the present moment. The supplies accumulated in the autumn are nearly depleted. The stack of buffalo chips is much smaller. The pemmican is running low. The dried meat is almost gone, but this is expected. The supplies were calculated to last through the winter, and they have. There is enough to carry through to the time when fresh food becomes available again. The timing is tight, but it is sufficient. Children who have been confined inside for weeks become restless. They want to run, to play outside, to explore. Parents allow short excursions, closely supervised. The children sled on the rib-bone sleds, shouting and laughing. They build small snow structures, practice shooting blunt arrows at targets, or engage in mock battles with snowballs. The sound of children's voices, which has been muted by the winter, returns to the camp. The first signs of exposed ground appear. The wind-scoured ridges, which have been mostly clear all winter, now show patches of dry grass. The grass is yellow, dead, but it is visible. It marks the beginning of the transition. More ground will be exposed with each passing day. The snow will retreat, first from the high places, then from the valleys. Water begins to flow again. The ice on smaller streams cracks and breaks up. Meltwater trickles beneath the ice, and eventually the ice collapses, releasing the water to flow freely. The sound of running water, absent for months, returns to the landscape. It is a soft, burbling sound, almost forgotten. Hearing it again is deeply satisfying, a confirmation that winter is ending. The tippy liners are taken down and shaken out. They have been in place for months, absorbing moisture, smoke and dust. They are aired, and any necessary repairs are made. The hides are inspected for damage, the poles are checked for cracks or weakness. The preparations for winter are evaluated. What worked, what needs to be done differently next year. This reflection is part of the cycle, a way of refining the knowledge that will be passed down. The buffalo robes are also aired. On a sunny day, they are draped over the outside of the tipi or hung from a frame. The sunlight and fresh air help to dry any residual moisture and reduce odours. The robes are beaten lightly to fluff the fur. They will be stored once the weather warms, packed away until the next autumn. For now, they are still needed at night, but the need is diminishing. The snow berm around the base of each teepee begins to melt. Water pools around the edges. The berm, which has been a solid barrier all winter, becomes slush and then mud. It is cleared away to prevent water from seeping under the tippy cover. The ground beneath is revealed, packed earth, dark and damp, showing the circular outline where the tippy has stood all winter. The fire, which has burned continuously for months, can now be smaller. Less fuel is needed. The temperature inside the tippy rises naturally with the lengthening days. The fire shifts from being essential for survival to being primarily for cooking and comfort. This reduction in fuel consumption is welcome. The remaining buffalo chips can be saved, used more sparingly now. The quality of sleep changes. Throughout the deep winter, sleep has been heavy, almost hibernation-like. The body, conserved by warmth and stillness, required long hours of rest. Now, as the days lengthen and the temperature moderates, people wake earlier. The dawn light entering the east-facing door is brighter, arriving earlier each morning. The internal rhythms begin to shift, preparing for the active season ahead. Hunters begin to venture farther from camp. The conditions are still challenging, but they are manageable. The goal is to find the bison herds, to locate where they have wintered and where they are beginning to move. Fresh meat would be welcome after months of dried provisions. The hunters travel on snowshoes, following the tracks, reading the signs. They do not expect to bring down large game immediately, but they are scouting, gathering information, preparing for the hunts that will come when the snow is fully gone. The elders sit in the sun when it is warm enough. They position themselves outside the teepees, facing south, wrapped in their robes. The sun on their faces is restorative after the long darkness. They talk quietly among themselves, watching the children play, observing the changes in the weather. Their conversation is unhurried. There is time now. The crisis has passed. The first green shoots appear. In the most sheltered spots, where the snow has melted completely and the ground has warmed, tiny points of green emerge. These are the earliest plants, hardy species that can tolerate the cold, that respond immediately to the first warmth. The green is vivid against the brown and grey of the landscape. It is a promise. More green will follow. The grass will return. The plains will transform again. The transition from winter to spring is not sudden. It is gradual, marked by incremental changes that accumulate over weeks. Some days feel like winter has returned. A storm blows in, the temperature drops, new snow falls, but these storms are shorter now, less intense. They pass quickly, and the warming continues. The winter count is updated. The keeper of the count adds a new pictograph to the hide, marking this winter. The image chosen might represent a significant event that occurred during the cold months. A birth, a death, a particularly harsh storm, a successful hunt, a meeting with another tribe. The image is painted carefully, added to the spiral of history. This winter becomes part of the record, one more marker in the long line of winters survived. Looking at the winter count now, the end of the season, provides perspective. This winter, difficult as it may have been, is not unique. The spiral contains many winters, each marked by its own challenges and events. The tribe has survived all of them. This continuity, this demonstration of resilience across time is comforting. It places the present in context. It suggests that the future too will be survivable. The knowledge gained this winter is noted and will be remembered. If a particular technique worked especially well, a new design for snowshoes, a better method of storing food, an improvement in the tipi construction, it will be retained and taught to others. If something did not work, a hide that failed, a strategy that proved ineffective, it will be modified or abandoned. The winter has been a test, and the results are being evaluated. The children have grown. They are taller, stronger, more knowledgeable than they were in the autumn. They have learned by watching, listening and doing. They have heard the stories, absorbed the teachings, practiced the skills. They are more capable now. Next winter they will contribute more. Eventually they will be the ones teaching, the ones maintaining the knowledge, the ones ensuring that their children survive. The teepee, which has been a fortress against the cold, will soon be just a dwelling. The double wall system, the snow berm, the tightly sealed base, all of these will be modified or removed. The liner will come down. The cover will be rolled up at the base to allow cooling breezes to flow through. The tipi will adapt to the changing season just as the people have adapted. The morning arrives when frost no longer forms on the inside of the tipi cover. The air inside and outside has equalized. The cold no longer penetrates. This is a definitive marker. The worst is over. Spring has arrived, even if Seu still lingers in the shadows. The first sustained rain comes, washing away the last of the snow. The water flows downhill, cutting channels through the remaining drifts, exposing the ground beneath. The earth, frozen for so long, begins to thaw. The surface becomes muddy, soft, yielding. Walking becomes messy, but no one complains. The mud is a sign of life returning. The bison herds begin to move. They have been scattered through the winter, sheltering in small groups in protected valleys. Now they coalesce, gathering on the open plains where the first grass is beginning to grow. The calves are born in the spring, adding to the herd's numbers. The hunters watch, waiting for the right moment. The cycle continues. The camp will move soon. The winter location, chosen for shelter and protection, is not ideal for the warmer months. There are better places, higher ground with better drainage, locations closer to summer hunting grounds, areas where the grass is richer and the water sources are more abundant. The decision of where to move is made collectively, with input from the leaders and elders. The knowledge of the landscape accumulated over generations guides the choice. The packing begins, the teepees are disassembled carefully, the poles are bundled, the covers are folded, the liners are rolled and tied. Everything that was built to withstand the winter is now being prepared for transport. The work is familiar, practiced. Everyone knows their role. The dogs are harnessed to travois. The horses, if there are horses, are loaded with packs. The people shoulder their own burdens, bundles of tools, containers of remaining food, personal belongings. The camp, which has been a fixed point for months, becomes mobile again. The circle of teepees dissolves. The people form a line, moving across the landscape. Behind them, the site of the winter camp is left. The circles where the teepees stood are visible. Dark patches of earth where the grass has been compressed and the kitchen of ground has been packed by the footsteps and the weight of the structures. The fire pits, now cold and filled with ash, mark where families gathered. In time, the grass will grow back. The signs will fade. The landscape will reclaim the space. But the knowledge does not fade, it travels with the people. The children who learned this, winter will teach their own children. The techniques, the stories, the understanding of how to survive, all of this continues. The winter has ended, but its lessons remain. What winter teaches. The plains in spring are a different world. The wind still blows, but it carries the scent of growing things rather than the bite of frost. The grass returns, shooting up green and vivid. The buffalo herds move across the landscape, their dark forms visible for miles. The rivers flow freely, their banks lined with cottonwoods that have survived another winter. Life resumes its rhythm, but the knowledge of winter does not vanish with the snow. It remains embedded in memory, practice, and culture. The people carry it forward because they know winter will come again. The cycle is eternal. The plains will freeze, the wind will howl, the snow will fall, and when it does, the knowledge will be there, ready to be applied once more. The winter was not conquered. This is important to understand. The tribes did not overcome the cold through force or dominance. They adapted to it. They observed the environment and learned from it. They watched how the bison survived and copied those strategies. They noticed where heat was lost and found ways to trap it. They recognized the properties of different materials and used them appropriately. Every solution was arrived at through observation, experimentation, and accumulated experience. The teepee is elegant because it works with the wind rather than against it. The cone shape deflects rather than resists. The dew cloth creates a system where cold air and smoke are managed through natural convection. The structure breathes, maintaining air quality while retaining heat. This is not brute force engineering. It is subtle, refined, responsive. The clothing system is similarly sophisticated. Layers that can be adjusted. Materials chosen for their specific properties: windproof buckskin, insulating fur, water-wicking grass. The daily replacement of moccasin grass is a small act, but it prevents frostbite. The system works because each element serves a purpose, and the purposes work together. The use of buffalo chips as fuel demonstrates resourcefulness. Wood was scarce, so an alternative was found. The chips burned slowly and steadily, exactly what was needed for long winter nights. The smell was pleasant, not offensive. The efficiency was high. This was not a compromise. It was an optimal solution given the constraints of the environment. The food, the pemmican with its high fat content, addressed the body's need for metabolic fuel. The fat provided calories and generated heat. The compact form made it portable. The long shelf life made it reliable. It was not just food, it was survival technology in edible form. The knowledge of how to read the landscape, the sastrugi, the animal signs, the quality of snow, extended survival beyond the immediate shelter. It allowed movement, hunting, navigation. The white expanse was not a blank void to those who knew how to read it. It was full of information, legible to trained eyes. The stories told by firelight preserved knowledge and culture. They entertained, but they also taught. They provided context and continuity. The winter count placed each winter in a historical sequence, showing that survival was possible because it had been achieved before. The children learning these stories were learning their identity and their inheritance. All of these elements, shelter, clothing, fire, food, navigation, culture, formed a comprehensive system. No single element was sufficient. All were necessary. The failure of any one could lead to death, but together they created a survival envelope that was robust and reliable. The relationship with the bison is central to understanding this system. The bison was not just a resource, it was a teacher. Its coat showed how to insulate, its fat showed what to eat, its behaviour showed how to position oneself in relation to the wind. The animal that had evolved through ice ages to survive on the plains shared that survival with the humans. When the hide was worn, when the tallow was eaten, when the chips were burned, the bison's adaptations became human adaptations. This is a different relationship with the environment than the modern approach of control and domination. The tribes did not try to change the plains or eliminate the winter. They accepted the conditions and found ways to exist within them. They lowered their profile, thickened their skin, slowed their pace. They became like the bison, enduring, adapted, integrated into the landscape. There is a kind of wisdom in this approach. It recognizes limits. It accepts that some forces cannot be overcome, only accommodated. The winter is vast, powerful, indifferent. Fighting it directly is futile and exhausting. But understanding it, adapting to it, working within its constraints, this is possible. This is what survival means. The knowledge accumulated over generations represents thousands of individual lessons learned, often at a great cost. A person who walked too far in inadequate moccasins and lost toes to frostbite taught everyone else the importance of proper insulation. A family whose tipai collapsed in a storm taught everyone else about proper placement and anchoring. A hunter who became lost in a whiteout taught everyone else about reading the snow. These lessons, learned through suffering and sometimes death, were preserved and passed down so that others would not have to learn them again. This transmission of knowledge is an act of care. The elder teaching the child how to change the grass in the moccasin is ensuring the child's survival. The parent demonstrating how to adjust the smoke flaps is passing on a skill that will keep the child warm. The storyteller recounting the winter count is giving the child a sense of history and identity that will sustain them through future hardships. The knowledge is a gift, earned through experience and given freely to the next generation. The winter on the plains was brutal, the temperatures were extreme, the wind was relentless, the snow was deep, people died. Not every year, but often enough that the danger was real and present. Hypothermia, frostbite, starvation, these were constant threats. The survival techniques described in this narrative were not luxuries or conveniences, they were necessities. Without them, life on the winter plains was impossible. But with them, life continued. Families gathered around fires, children grew, stories were told as skills were practiced and refined, the culture persisted. The winter was not a void or a suspension of life. It was a season with its own rhythms, its own work, its own gifts. The stillness allowed for reflection. The confinement created space for teaching. The hardship forged resilience. When spring came, the people emerged from their winter camps changed. They had survived another season. They had demonstrated their competence and their knowledge. They had maintained their culture and passed it to their children. The winter had tested them, and they had endured. The snow melts, the grass returns, the bison move across the plains, the cycle continues. But the memory of winter remains, and the knowledge of how to survive it is carried forward, ready for when the cold returns again. This is the gift of winter, not comfort or ease, but the certainty that survival is possible, that knowledge endures, that the people will continue. The fire burns low, the hide walls of the tipi glow softly in the fading light. Outside, the wind has died. The stars are visible, sharp and cold in the clear sky. Inside, warmth lingers. The family sleeps, wrapped in buffalo robes, resting on layers of grass and willow. The winter holds them, but they are safe. They have learned its lessons. They have applied its teachings. They endure. And in the morning, the sun will rise in the east, casting golden light across the snow. The day will begin again. The work will continue. The knowledge will be practiced. The winter will be survived. This is what has always been done. This is what will always be done. The cold teaches stillness, and in that stillness, the people find the strength to continue.